Spectacular students of Swift, we are going to review the answers for our iOS heavy exam in our apps class. And just so that you know what the app looks like when we run, we see all of our Star Wars data load. It loads page JSON. You can click on something like Hut here and see all the information about Jabba. You can see it loads all our page JSON here. We can see some information about Chewie. So that's what we're going to go ahead and create. Let's build. So app number 1 is the Star Wars Species Guide, and in honor of the opening of the new movie Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, you've been asked to create a Star Wars app using the swappy.co API. This is the Star Wars API. The app will use a table view to show a list of all the species of creatures in the Star Wars movies. When the user clicks on a given species, the app will segue to a detail display to display a small amount of information on selected species. So it's not actually all of the species in Star Wars, but it's a nice API that doesn't require an API key, and it's great for us to be able to complete one of 2 apps during our 2.5-hour exam. So demonstrate that you can create a table view and code a working table view. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create an Xcode project called Star Wars Species. Actually, the first thing that it asks you to do is to open a browser and download all of the images. So the images I've actually prepared for you to load from locally within your app. So just in case this takes a while, I've navigated over to the URL that I had listed on the previous page, and I'm going to right-click to download from this Google Drive. And it might take a while to zip up all of this stuff, and I'll get a message when we're ready to save. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and create our Xcode project and embed the default view controller and a navigation controller and add the table view and the table view cell. And it says that this should be working and run, and here are some names of creatures that we can put in there too. So I'll just copy those names of creatures so I can paste those in when we're demonstrating how to set this up. But right now I'll open up Xcode. I'm still using Xcode 10 even though Xcode 11 is out, just because I know how everything is going to work with respect to the things that we've been doing in class up to this point, but it will run and work in Xcode 11. If you'd like to use it in Xcode 11, there's no problem with that. So we're waiting for Xcode to launch. And I'm going to create a new project. The new project should be called Star Wars Species. So single view app, next, Star Wars Species, and I'm going to save mine right to the desktop. And I'll make my Xcode full screen. And right from the start here, so we're going to set up our view controller, on our main storyboard here. One of the things that I'd asked, I guess we should go step by step in here, is create a new project, embed the default view controller in a navigation controller, and add a table view and a table view cell. So we're going to embed this in a navigation controller first. And remember, this is going to give us a space up top where we can put our bar button items, which is fairly standard in an iOS app like this. And I'll go up under, so now that I've clicked on my table view on the little yellow view controller indicator up here, I will go under editor, I will select embed in, I will select navigation controller, and the navigation controller pops up. Now this actually isn't something which exists as an independent unit. It controls, though, all of the navigation bar stuff that's going to happen for everything that we use our show segue across. So everything is going to be on top of and inside of this navigation controller unit as we go over and add one more view controller in here too. So we've made this embed in here. Now we're going to set up our table view. So I'm going to go up here to Object Library, click on it. I'm going to type in table view, and we're going to drag over the table view. And we're also going to drag over, I'm going to click on Object Library again, Table View Cell. And again, if I would have Option clicked on that, the Object Library would have remained up there. Now that I've got my Table View Cell selected, I am going to set the identifier for the Table View Cell. So you can see it says Table View Cell in our Attribute Inspector up here. I'll do capital C, lowercase ell, which is just a standard name that we've been using. Now I'm going to click on my Table View as well to extend this. I'm going to bolt it to the sides, even though I didn't ask you to do that. I will go down here and select Add New Constraints. Again, Table View is selected, not Table View Cell, and I'm going to set the constraints to top, bottom, left, and right to 0, 0, 0, 0. Add those 4 constraints, and we can see now it takes up the whole screen in the view controller, save for the safe area at the bottom and the navigation controller area at the top. Now I'm going to go into my view controller, and I'm going to Option click on Main Storyboard so that I get my Assistant Editor mode. and I'll give myself a little bit more space here. And the only thing at this point that I need to create an IB outlet for is for my table view. So I'm going to control drag from table view. I'm going to let go just underneath our class declaration here, and I'm going to call it table view in lower camel case like we usually do. And now I no longer need my main storyboard for the stuff that I'm going to be doing. Now remember, we're going to be setting up a table view, and we're going to create an array down here. It says named species, and it's just an array of strings. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to declare a class-wide property. I'll say var species equals open bracket, because this is going to be an array, and then I close brackets at the end, so I've got my array of strings. Now when I set up table view, always think delegate and data source. So I'm going to do, in my view did load here, I'll say table view dot delegate equals self, and table view dot data source equals self. And so this creates a tight link between what iOS does with table views and gives the ability of iOS to send messages when it needs some extra stuff from our view controller code here. And in fact, we're going to do that now by implementing a protocol with required functions that are needed when we work with a table view. So it's a good idea to organize all of your table view code in an extension. So I'm going to write extension down here. I'm going to extend view controller, which is the class that I'm in. I'll say colon, and remember, we're remembering delegate data source, delegate data source. So that's actually the protocols that we need to adopt are table view delegate, and I say comma, and then table view data source. So both of those are in there, and I do open and close curly. I'll wait a second here, and Xcode will offer to put in the stubs of the protocol, or of the two functions that are required as part of this protocol. So the first one here, this is just gonna, it wants to know the number of rows in sections. So essentially what we're gonna pass in or return here, because notice that it's got to have an integer returned. Every time we use this function, we're just putting in return, and it's going to be species.count, which is the number of elements in this array. Now down here, what we've got is our cell for row at. So what we do here is we construct a cell, and then we send it back as part of our return here in the Swift function. So we'll say let cell equal, and we'll say table view dot dequeue reusable cell. We'll select this option here that has the identifier string and the index path. The identifier string is the capital CELL that we wrote on our main storyboard. And for the index path, well, that's actually being passed in right here. That's this value right here. So we'll put in lower camel case index path. And so that means we've set up our cell. Then what we're going to do here is we're going to return our cell. And then what we do in the middle is we put any content in the cell that we want to display every time iOS needs a cell. So that's what this is doing, is every time iOS needs a cell, this is called. So we're going to say cell dot, and text label is the sort of default label that we have on our table view cell. And I'll say text, and we'll see Xcode will grump because I didn't put a question mark in there, but I'll let Xcode grump. And we're going to get the species. And then since species is an array here, what is the index of the array? It's index path dot row. And now that we've got this set up, this should be good. And the one thing it's going to want, as I'd mentioned, it's going to want to put in a question mark in here, because we have a optionally chain to be able to put stuff inside of our text. But now that we've got this, this should work if we go ahead and build and run. And I will build and run on an iPhone 11, so we can see how that would look on that particular device, but you can choose any one. And we should just see this list of species in here. And again, the species that I put in, these are just, oh, so sorry, that's my personal iPhone. I should have selected the, how about iPhone 10 here? That's fine. Same profile. So this is just some holder text to make sure that our table view is working. And again, I typically build apps this way, is every function, I'll try to make sure that works before moving on, just to make sure that I don't have any, errors in there or things like that. So that's why I've got data in here. I will actually not be using this data. We're going to replace the species variable with something of the class type that we're going to create, which is going to hold the species. But right now, it always takes a little while for us to launch the first app in the simulator. We're waiting for that to get up here and launch. Come on. And finally, here we are. Come on. Show us the app. There we go. So we got our hut and our Ewok and our Wookiee. So these are the 5 strings that we had in our array of strings here. This is looking good. Super. We're ready to move on. So I'm not gonna close my simulator because it'll things will execute more quickly if I leave that up. I'm just gonna click on stop right here. So first part done. Up next, we are going to add Alamofire SwiftyJSON and create a custom class to hold all of the species. So the first thing we need to do is we need to quit out of Xcode and install the Alamofire and SwiftyJSON Cocoapods. So Alamofire is just a set of routines which will simplify how we can access data over the internet, and SwiftyJSON will help us parse JSON very, very easily. And these are very professional Cocoapods. These are software libraries that lots of folks use. And I even set up over here some text that you could download right from this link that is the text that you need to have in your pod file. So I'm just going to copy this right here. You would have copied it by going to this URL, and I'm going to minimize my browser for now. Or actually, I'm just going to show up on my desktop here and take a look for a quick shortcut to inside of Star Wars Species. So I double-clicked on Star Wars Species, so I'm inside here, and now I'm going to create my Cocopod for the Star Wars Species project that I'm on. So again, you want to make sure that you've quit out of Xcode. So I'm going to quit out of Xcode for this. I guess I can quit out of my simulator, although I might not need that. And I'll just I'll command spacebar to see Spotlight, and I'll type in terminal, press enter. Terminal is up. Some people like to navigate directly over, but I am really, often I make typing errors. I'm just going to type CD space to change directories. Then I'm going to click over here on Star Wars Species. Again, I'm just in the first level of folder, so I'm right on my desktop here. But by clicking on this and dragging over, what's going to happen is if I let go, after the space is the path to this particular directory will be pasted in. And then I'm going to say pod init, and that's going to create my Cocopod file. And we should see that created here right inside of this folder that I had navigated to. I'm going to drag my pod file, and again, some people like to edit it right within terminal, but I like to leverage the WYSIWYG editor, and so I dragged it inside of Xcode, and inside Xcode I'm actually going to get rid of my old pod file and paste in the data that I'd had before, so that it's all in there, and you don't have to indent it, but when you see Cocopod or pod file text listed, it will usually look like this. Now again, you have to make sure that you called your app Star Wars Species app, and in fact I have. If you didn't, your Cocoapods will not install properly, and it is case specific, so that's important. If you have a different name in there, make sure that you've changed that. I'm going to do a Command S to save. I'm going to quit out of Xcode again, and I'm going to go back over here to terminal, and I'm going to say pod install, and I should see in the window behind the scenes here, stuff changes and is added. I get the pod directory in here, pod file lock, and I'm all done. So I no longer need my terminal program. I'm going to quit out of here. Remember, whenever you use Cocoapods, you have to use the Xcode proj, not your, your workspace, not your proj. So don't open up your proj, open up your workspace. I'm going to drag mine into Xcode 10 so that I don't open it with Xcode 11, just for consistency. And getting back in here, and let's continue. So I just, open things up with our triangle expansion. And up next, we're going to create a struct with a new species data class. And I mentioned the class, it shouldn't be called a class, it should be called a struct. So we're creating a struct file with a new species data struct, and name the struct species data, and place it in the species data.swift file. And in there we should have 2 properties. We should have name, which is a string, and URL, which is a string. So I'm going to hop over to Xcode, and I'm going to create my new struct, which should be called upper camel case species data. And the reason why I clicked on app delegate is it'll create it just below wherever I've clicked on here. So I'll say file, new, file. And it doesn't matter where you put it, but most folks like to have their data objects up top, or their model objects up top. And as your project gets bigger, you'll organize these in folders too. But this is kind of a small project, so we have everything in one folder. I'm going to click on Swift file here, and I'm going to call this species data. and it's a Swift file. The reason why it's a Swift file, so I've got different choices here. If I were subclassing something that Apple had created, an initial Apple blueprint, like a table view cell, view controller, I would use a Cocoa touch class, and I would subclass what Apple has done, building on Apple's blueprint. But since there is no species data class, this is something new that I'm creating, I'm clicking on Swift file here. Both of those will create a Swift file, but this is a master class, or the sort of top parent level. And here I'm going to call this species data, and click on create, and it has created this right here. Now I'm going to say first I'm going to say struct capital species data, open and close curly, and just to verify here, so I've got a name and a URL. So you could do this a couple of different ways. You could declare and not initialize, but what I'll do here is I'll declare and initialize at the same time here. So I'll say name equals an empty string, and var URL equals empty string. So name and URL. So what these are, as well as what we're going to have for each of the different Star Wars species, we've got a name for that species, and then we've got a URL which we can navigate to get more information. And that's information that you will see here in, for example, here's all the information on HUT, that they're a gastropod, their classification, delegation, height, lifespan, and what have you. So again, these are the names, the URLs we're passing over, and we'll use that to get more information at yet another web page. It's going to return more JSON for us. So now that we've set this up, it says, so no points set up Alamofire, we did that. Then we created our struct, we did that as well. Now we're going to create a class file with a new species class named species and place it in species.swift. So we're doing this as a class file. It's a little bit easier, I think, to work with classes when we access things over the internet using SwiftyJSON and Alamofire. So let's go ahead and create a new species class. We're going to use the same technique that we'd used before. So I'm in species data. I'll declare that, or I'll create this right underneath species data. You could drag things around too, but why not put it in the place where I want it right away? I'll go under File. I'll say New. I'll say File. It is a Swift file because there is no existing species class. I'll call it species. And I don't even know if I need to put the .swift. Apple will go ahead or Xcode will go ahead and do that. And I'm going to say class capital species, open and close curly, and let's see what properties we have in here. So we have number of species, which is an int, and we have an API URL, which is this. So I'm going to declare these over here. So I'll say var number of species. And again, I could declare this, or I could declare them but not initialize them, but then I would have to write an initializer. So just to sort of save some of my coding, and as I try to build this app very quickly, I'm just going to put an empty, or a number of species I'm going to initially set to 0. My API string, though, I'm going to set it to this because I'm going to use this right away to call and get more data. So I'll say var API URL equals, and then I'm pasting in this API URL. And let's see, what do we have over here? We're going to create a species array, which is an array of species data. That's the struct that we just created. And there are no elements in it initially. So I'll say var species array, colon, open bracket, species data. This is, again, the struct with a little s there. It says it's struct, the one that I just created. And if I say equal, open and close bracket here, so I've declared it as an array of species data, this stuff up here, but there's nothing in it initially. So, all right, we've declared this particular class. Now, if you want to go and see what things look like on the internet, I'm going to take this URL that I've just copied, and I'm going to paste it in. Let's do this right in a new page here, and we can see the data that we are going to get. And we've got, so the overall count of species that we have in the swappy.co API is 37, and we see different results that are showing up here. Under results, we see with a bracket, this is an array. So the first one is a HUT, the second one is Yoda species, the third one is Trandoshan. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Star Wars fans. Mon Calamari. So you can see as they go down here, Ewok. So those are different ones that we're going to get, and there are only, I guess, about 10 on the first page, but we see, just like with our Pokemon example that we had done in class, there is a next URL. It says null with previous because we're starting with the first API right here. And if you're curious, if you click on this, you'll get yet another page of Star Wars species, and here it goes. It shows up right here, and we see a different set of species showing up. So we'll do page JSON in just a bit. Now add a method get species to the species class, and we want to make an Alamofire call. We want to check the results that are returned. If we are successful, we want to go through the JSON elements and grab our number of species, the next API URL, and loop through the results and populate the species array with all of the species data, meaning the name property and the URL property. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to hop over and we're going to structure this the same way that we structured all of our API calls in class, where we've got multiple items sort of in an array. So what we'll do right under here is we'll say func get species, and we'll do open and close parentheses first, but we'll set this eventually with a completion handler in it. And what we'll do right away is now, so since we're going to call Alamofire and we're going to call SwiftyJSON, if I started typing in commands for Alamofire and SwiftyJSON, it would not know those exist. And the reason it would not know those exist is because I have not imported the libraries that I need. So I'm going to say up here, import Alamofire, import SwiftyJSON. Again, a quirk with Xcode and Cocoapods is sometimes you will get an error up here that says, hey, the library or the pod file doesn't exist. It does exist if you've installed it properly, and when you build and run, things should work. If for some reason you build and run and they don't work, then something went wrong with your installation. But don't be shocked if there is occasionally an error message which comes up here and says something doesn't exist that should. Great, so now we've got our get species set up. Inside here, I'm going to call Alamofire, and I'll say dot request. What do we request? We request a URL. The URL is going to be our API URL. And then what we're going to get from this is, so now that we've got our API URL, we'll say response JSON in here, so we get JSON back, and then open and close curlies. And then inside, we'll refer to our response as response in, and then this is what we do once we get a response. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to evaluate our response. So that's where we have our switch case statement. So we say switch response.result, open and close curly. And we have two cases in here. So we have case if it's a success, so that's dot success. And then we're going to open parentheses and we'll say let value, and we'll close parentheses in here. And so value is what we're getting back from our successful response. But we also have another one where we have the potential of a case that's failure. And if we have a case that's failure, well, we'll get our error here. So that's what the let error is all about. And I'll put in my error right away. And again, this is the sort of, we refer to it as a software Lego in class, the things that we're going to use and we're not going to change every time. So, you know, theoretically, not on the test, you could copy and paste this stuff from previous code. You might change the name get species, but the function of what goes on inside of this will be pretty similar for the first few lines that we put in here. So for failure, I'm going to say print. And I like to put emojis in here to sort of draw my attention to the fact that there's an error. And so let me pull up my my emojis in here. And whoops, Control Spacebar should pull up the emojis. Come on. For some reason the emojis aren't showing up in here, but I'm just going to go up under Edit and say emojis and symbols. Yeah, it should be. Shift Command Space should do that. All right, Shift Command Space. For some reason I'm having a brain issue. I always put in my errors to angry emojis. Again, just draws my attention to the fact that, hey, there's something I should be paying attention to. And the message you can put in here, again, will be standard, and you don't need to change it from access to access. I'll say error, fail to get data from URL. It'll be self.api URL, comma, error, and then I'll also do string interpolation in here that says error.localized description. And how come localized description isn't showing up? It should show up here for localized description. Description. So hopefully that will work when Xcode catches up. Sorry. So now what I'm noticing here, why I'm mumbling to myself, sorry about that, is that I didn't get code completion down here, which usually means there's something squirrely going on. This is the no such module Alamofire, which you can ignore. There is an Alamofire module. We installed it properly. So for our success, what are we going to do in here? So the first thing that I'll do is I'll say let lowercase JSON equal uppercase JSON. So essentially we're saying go to the factory for creating a new all JSON data type in here using value. It converts it into JSON. And then just to make sure that everything is working, one of the things you can do is you can just say print JSON. And now before this will actually run and show us a result, so let's see, Response result. What does it not like? I spelt it wrong. Response here and response here, which is probably the reason why the localized description wasn't picked up. So good. Now that we've got this, and Xcode found my error, thank you Xcode. So I'm going to run this, but in order for this to run, what we need to do is we need to call it. So I'm over in viewcontroller.swift now, and I need to declare a something of type species. So I'm going to go back in here and just say species equal, and then capital species, open and close parentheses. And I'm eventually going to have to change the stuff down here as well, so I guess I'll go ahead and do that right now. So instead of saying species count, I'm going to say species array count, because that's what's going to hold each of the different names as well as the URLs for all of the different species that I've got in here. Again, here's a name and URL, we're going to see for each of these species in here. And then what am I going to do down here? I'm going to say species.species array indexPath.row. But really, the reason why I wanted to do this is I just want to shut up the errors. And I've got to say .name in here for the property type. I just want to shut up these errors so I can go up here and call species.getSpecies. Eventually, I'll have a completion handler in here, but right now I just want to call this so I can take a look down below and make sure that my API call is working. So, again, I always sort of build a little chunk, test it, build a little chunk and test it to make sure, I don't have errors as I continue and move forward through the code. And we should see down here no errors, and we should see JSON that looks identical to not the page 2 stuff, but the page 1 stuff that we've got in here. And again, this is just a header which shows up from the website. This is the actual JSON that's coming down. And let's see, so it's launching. And there we see nothing showing up here because we haven't read in any of our data to our table view, but we should see down here, since we called this, didn't we call species? How come? Oh, you know what I did? I didn't print the stuff out, so that's why I'm not seeing my results. So I'm going to go back into species.swift, and let's see. So we got our JSON in here. Oh, and I did say print JSON. Oh, and we did. I'm sorry, it just took a while for us to get the data. And so here it is. This is the exact stuff that we have here. So that's great. Count next results. We see all the stuff here. Again, with JSON, you're never really sure what order things are going to be in. It's because it's any dictionary that we get. But we still have all of the values in here, and we can traverse this stuff and parse it, and that's what we're going to do next. So now that I know this works, I can get rid of my print JSON. I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to get the results that I need now. So if I take a look at some of the things that I want to keep track of the number of species. I want to get the next API URL. And if we take a look at where these things are, so the number of species is going to be in count. So I'll just copy count in here. That's my key for my key value pair. I can see this as an integer in here because it's not in quotes. So I'm going to type in, let's see, it's going to be self.number of species. And if you forgot self, just Xcode would remind you, hey, you're inside of curly's in here, so you need a self because you're in your handler. And I'll say that this equals, and it's going to be JSON, open bracket, and then quote, count, close quote. That's because count is the key value pair here, and it's at the first level of JSON that I've got. And this is an integer, so I'm going to say int value, and that's going to pull down a value, and I'm going to have my num of species. Next, I'm also going to get my API URL, which is going to be my next URL. So if I say JSON open, and this is going to be a string value here, I'm just going to copy right from here next. So again, that's going to get my page 2. So I've got my page 2 queued up for the very next time I make this API call, and I'm going to replace this value here because I've already got my first page. I'm not going to need that anymore. So good. We've got that set up. And now what we need to do is we're going to grab our species. And so if we take a look, our species are actually inside of an array called results. It's really identical to the way that the Pokemon stuff was set up. There's not a guarantee that your JSON is always going to be this way, but oftentimes if you've got results in an array for page JSON, and you're seeing a certain number of results on the first page, it's often in a results key, and inside of that you can consider it to be a value like a dictionary value here. You see you've got multiple different elements, so the value is a dictionary itself, or actually I should say an array of dictionary values inside. So what we're going to do first is we're going to figure out, all right, how many elements do we have in this results area here? So we are going to say specifically, let's see, we'll say let, and why don't we just call this num of species. And that's different from number of species. I'm sorry if these are too close to each other. You could call it num of results if that makes it a little bit easier for you to read. In fact, why don't we do that? I'll call it num of results. And I'll say this equals JSON, and then inside is response. So again, this, or I'm sorry, it's not response, it's results. So I'm going to grab results. And now that we have results, then what do I want? I'm going to want to go through all of these. So this is going to give me right here, I'm going to say .count. It's going to give me the count of results in this sort of results array that I'm returning in here. And now that I know my number of results, and I want to go through all of those results, so I'm going to say for index I in 0 ... less than num of results, and just make sure that I spell this right here and here. I did. So now that I've got this, what I can do is go through and grab each of the individual items. Let's see, what do you not like here? So for I index 0 in num of results, it should be ... less than. It should accept that. Do you not like that? Oh, because I'm not, I have an extra space in there. That's why it's grumping about that. So let's see, for index in. So I'll do for index in or for I in. So sorry, making errors as I type my code in here, but it's good that you see that and what I did and how to correct it. So now that I've got this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a similar read in here. I will say in here, let name equal. So I'm going to grab the name out of. So I'm going to go in here, go into results, go into the number of the results, starting at 0, and then 1, and then 2. So results 0, or results index, name, and then I'm going to go results 0, which is going to be my index, and that's the URL that I'm going to grab in here. So I'll say let name equals, and I'm going to grab JSON results. Instead of typing it in, I'll just paste it right here, and then I'll say index, and then after this, what is the key that I want in here? The key is going to be name. So I'll just grab this here, and that's going to return a string as its value in here. So I say string value. So that's what I got here. Again, if for some reason it didn't have it, it would just return an empty string. That may or may not be what you want in your executing app if you need to have some more error handling in here. But this is just a simple app, so we'll go ahead and let the error handling be part of this. And if we get a null value in here, it would just make this to be equal to an empty string. And then what we're going to do down here is pretty much the same thing, but I'm going to grab this, and instead I'm going to say let URL equal, and then its URL is the key value. That's this guy right down here. So cool. Now that I've got this, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to append these values as a new species data value inside of my species array. So I'll say self.speciesArray, and if you forget self, you'll be reminded by Xcode to make it self.append. And what we're going to append in here is species data. So that's why I use the capital species, capital data. And when we open parentheses here, we say go to the species data factory, use this blueprint, and create a new, in this case, it's a struct, and then append it to the array. And what's going to be in here, when I press enter, it tells me you need a name, and my name is called name, and you need a URL, and my URL is called URL. So I've got this all set up too, and this should give me the results. Now, if you wanted to be ultra sure that you've got this, you can go ahead and put a print statement in here and rerun. So that's not a bad idea if you think, hey, it looks like I've got errors in here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a print statement with 3 pieces of string interpolation, just so you can see how to do that. And I will say the first thing is index dot, and then I'll say name, and then I'll say URL. And when I build and run, I can verify, hey, I've got all this stuff. I'm putting it in values I want. I'm creating the array that I want. This is looking good. Now, while I'm waiting this to run, I'm just going to see this down here. And in fact, I see I've got 0 through 9 for my different indexes, and it is Hut through Doug. So that's great. It's got it. The reason it's not showing up here is because we have not yet put in our escape clause in here, so that we're going to have an escape completion handler, which will not execute the stuff after this in our other code until we have gotten the data. So again, I'll describe this a little bit more as we're going through here, but you've seen this in class. We'll say completed : @ escaping. And what we're going to return in here is we're putting nothing into the completion handler that we're going to run. We're not expecting to get anything out of it as well. But what we need to do is we need to put in completed here where either we've got a success or a failure. So I'm going to put it back in here. I'll say completed, open and close parenthesis in here. And we're looking good. So now let's go ahead and see. Let's see. Does this not like something that I wrote in here? Escaping. So after the escaping in here, so completed escaping, I need to put in what it's returning in here just to close this off at the end, so I don't have a closing. And this isn't supposed to be here. So there we go. And again, you'll also have your completion handler will pretty much be the same, but sometimes you're passing things out, like maybe a true or false Boolean as to whether you got results or you didn't get results. I'm not going to worry about that here because I'll either have success or failure. If I got no results, I'll just show nothing. And if I'm expecting anything out of the code I'm about to run. So now that I've got this all set up, essentially what this does is it says, hey, once you have confirmed that you've completed, which means that you've got some data, then you can put in another handler to write some more code. And so if I go back to viewcontroller.swift in here, watch what happens when I rewrite getSpecies. Whoops, now it's not showing up yet, so I'm going to do a Shift Command K and stop what I'm executing here. And now Xcode will remember the fact that if I type in species, you see how it changes here and I get a curly brace and code in between? This says, okay, this is what I'll execute once I get your data back, once I've hit the word completed inside of my getSpecies call. And what I want to do in here is I'll just say self.tableview. If you didn't put in the self, Xcode will remind you. And I'll say reload data. Now, since I already updated everything here for the species array, we should see this works when we build and run. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And hopefully this will be nice and quick. And what I should see here is the first 10 species. Now, I've got my first 10 species here, which is great. What I really would like to do, though, is I'd like to be showing a whole screen full of species if I've got them. So since I've seen 10 in here, one thing that I'm going to want to do is when I go in and I load each individual cell, so I load cell 1, 2, 3, or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, up until 9, if I've loaded cell 9 down here, and that's how many values that I have in my the count of my species array, but I have not yet reached the number of Pokemon, which is 36, and we saved in a property of species, then what I want to do is I want to do another call to get species, and I want to grab that data and pull it down. Now, the other thing that I'm going to look for is I don't want to keep calling and calling and calling if I scroll up if I no longer have another URL to go to. So I'm also going to pay attention to, and this is exactly as we did it in Pokemon, I'm going to pay attention to this next value here, and I'm going to make sure the next value is got an HTTP as its prefix in here, because we'll see when we go to the next one, we've got HTTP as the prefix. When we go to the next one, we've finally, we've not used them all up yet, so let me go to page 4 here. Now we've used them all up, and we see we've got no next, we've got a null for a next in there. And so once we're there, we don't want to gather more data because we're not going to be able to gather more data. So, great. So what we're going to do down here is, well, first let me get rid of this print because we don't need this print anymore inside of species.swift. And I'm going to go into viewcontroller.swift, and let's see where this is in terms of everything that we've done. So we wrote our get species. We modified our view controller, so everything is showing in our view controller. Now let's update the navigation bar so we can show information by accessing self.navigationItem.title in here and update this so we can say use this update for the navigation bar to read X of Y species loaded. So we'll go ahead and do that. Let's see, we'll do it right inside of the getSpecies call because we will have had our getSpecies at this point. So we will say self.navigationItem.title equals, and then we're going to build a string in here, and we're going to say something of something species loaded. So for the species loaded, the maximum species that we have is going to be self.species.number of species. And then over here, the current amount of species that we have loaded is going to be self.species.speciesArray.count. So, all right, so this should work. I'm going to stop this build and run. And while this is building and running, I'm going to look at my next thing to arrive at here. So in table view self for row at, check to see if more rows should be loaded as you scroll. And if so, load the roles. Load the roles. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do it the same way that we did with Pokemon. We don't have to build a load all though, which is nice. So we can just update this function here. But let's just make sure here it's running. We see 10 of 36 species. That's great. So what we want to do is we want to say, hey, have we reached 37 species yet? And do we have up here, are we showing the last element in the species array? And if we've hit the last element in our species array here, then we're going to take a look to see, is there another page of data to load? And if there is another page of data to load, then we're going to load it. How do we know if there's another page of data to load? Because the API URL will start with HTTP. If it doesn't, then we hit the last page that has, just to show you in here, a null in the next value. So how are we going to write this in our code? We're going to go right into our cell for row at. And after we've updated this particular cell, we are going to say if indexPath.row, which is going to grab us, what is the cell that you're looking at right now? And does this equal species.speciesArray.count -1, which means, hey, are we showing the last element for all of the data that we've gotten? And if we are, then that means we need more data if there is more data to get. How do we know if there is more data? We're going to say and, so if this is true and, what are we looking at here? We're going to say species dot API URL dot has prefix, and I'll just put in here HTTP. So, if it was null, it would be an empty string in here. So there are lots of different ways to check this. I think this is a fine and intuitive way to check it. So we'll go ahead and put that in. And so if this is true, then we need to gather more data. What do we need when we gather more data? We do this exact same call that we have up here. If you wanted to break this out into a special, load species function, that would be totally fine. In fact, it's probably better code practice to do that. So why don't we do that? We'll say func load species, open and close parentheses, curly, paste that in here, and then I can call load species here. Whoops. And I can call load species here. And so this should work. Let's go ahead and build and run. And what we should find is every time we haven't loaded all of the pages of our data here. So see how we got 10 to 37 and then we paused for a second and then it loaded the next 10. So if we continue to scroll up, watch what's happening here. As we scroll up, we scroll up, we scroll up, then we got 30 in here. So when we got to number 20, that was the number that was showing in here. So the cell that we were loading was the maximum number of elements that we had in our array, but we knew we had more elements to load because our API next started with HTTP. Now we'll continue to scroll down here until we get to the very bottom. And we see we've got 37 in here. Notice we're not loading anymore. We're not getting any errors in here because what we have when we get to this condition is we say, okay, we're at the very bottom here. This part is true, but this part is not going to be true because has prefix is going to not start with HTTP because it is got the null value in here, which it's technically it's showing up as an empty string in here. But this works. So cool. All right. I'm glad this is working. And now, for the last part of building this app, it says do everything needed to add a new view controller named DetailViewController, like the one at the right. The URL should look roughly like the one at the right. Having all of the elements is important, but don't fuss with alignment or fonts unless you're finished. So I'm not going to grade you on that. The DetailViewController should contain elements with the following IB outlets and say, hey, leave enough space for a navigation controller because I'm going to tell you you're going to need one of those. And if you press for time, you can just put in the label, the classification, the height, so I know that you've got those three in there. And so the name label is what you see in Yoda's species up here. And then we've got species image, classification label, designation label, height label, lifespan label, language label, skin color label, hair color label, and eye color label. So let's go ahead and set this up. And it's called a DetailViewController. So I'm going to go over here. And it's interesting. So I said, hey, leave some space up top for the navigation controller. You can go ahead and embed the navigation controller if you want right now. I'll just leave some space so I can go through and you can see me go through piece by piece in terms of what I'm asking you to do here. But let's see. So I'm going to go over here, click on main storyboard. I don't care about the interface that much, so I haven't given you, specific fonts to use or things like that. But I'm going to go over here. I'm going to add a new view controller, drag this over here, plop it in. Now notice when I drag a new view controller up here, it's called view controller. So what I want to do is I want to create a Swift file so that I can manipulate what's happening in this view controller. So I can have a Swift file and a class associated with what I've just added. So what I'm going to do is right under view controller, I click on view controller. I'm going to go under file, new file. Now this time I'm subclassing a blueprint that Apple has created. So that's why I click on Cocoa class. And for subclass, I want it to be UI view controller. So make very, very sure it's UI view controller. It's easy to overlook this if you have been doing things with like page view controller or some other types of view controllers in there. And instead of calling it view controller, I've already got one that's called view controller. I'm going to call this one detail view controller, upper camel case, because this is a class. I'll click on next, save it. I get a lot of green comments in here. I'm going to delete the green comments because I don't need those. And we're almost there. But remember, so if we go back to main storyboard and we still hover our cursor over, this still says it's called view controller. And that's because I've got to click on this new view controller here, then go up into my identity inspector, which I think looks like a newspaper, but it's supposed to look like an ID card. I'll click on custom class here and I'll select what I just created, detail view controller. Now the name changes to detail view controller. You see it's changed over here as well. And this file is linked to this object on screen. Cool. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter some labels. So I'll say label in here and pass this guy over, and I'll start to duplicate some of my labels too with a command D, and I'll make things a little bit larger here so they're easier to work with and I can see the handles. And the first thing I'm going to do in here is I'll drag a label from end to end, and I'll just put in some bogus text that I'll get rid of just so that I can see there's some text in here and how it looks. So I'll call this Yoda's species, but I'm going to get rid of that at some point. And again, I didn't give you any special fonts to use, so if you didn't do any, that's totally fine. But just to make it look nicer, I'm going to go up here and do custom font. And I'll do, what do I usually like? Avenir, next condensed, bold. And I'll do that at 36 point. And done. And to make this a little bigger, you can just drag it or whatever. And if you do shift command equal, that should, or it's just command equal, it sort of fits it perfectly. That's not exactly what I want because I want to tap this to the edge here, so I drag that over. And again, you don't have to pin them, but if I go up here and I say, okay, I'm going to pin top, left, right, and keep the height the same, that's not bad. And let's see, so I've got a few other things that I want to do in here. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to design on my smallest iPhone, which is good practice. SE is the smallest one I'm going to do. I'd never run anything on the 4 because it doesn't run the latest operating systems. And let's see, so what are we going to have for label in here? I'm just going to continue to look back. So one says classification, mammal, designation, sentient, eye color. So all right, let's put some of this stuff in here. So, whoops, go back to where I am. So I'll say this is classification, colon, and I'll put sentient in here. And you know what, I'm going to right justify these guys in here too. So these all look like they're over here on one side, and then these guys are all less justified. And I guess the biggest thing that I have in here is eye color. It's brown, green, and yellow. So just to make sure that I've got enough space in here, I'm going to do the eye color one next. And I'll say eye color, colon, brown, green, yellow. And I can see I need more space. And if you wanted to, there's nothing wrong with, changing the font sizes and stuff. And let's see, what am I going to do? I'm going to show the picture of Yoda down below. So, okay, I think that's going to be fine for me. let's see, so we got classification, then we've got designation. Oh, so classification is mammal. But again, I'm going to delete that so it doesn't really matter what's in this particular value over here. But this will be designation. Then what have I got? I've got height and weight. I'll just give myself some space for that. But then put in language, skin color, hair color. All right, so space. And let's do over here language, skin color, hair color. And then what do we have up here? We've got height and lifespan. So I'll put height here, and I'll put, whoops, lifespan here. And let's see, so how tall are they going to be? Probably no more than that much tall. So maybe I can bring these characters closer to each other. And for lifespan, probably the same thing, more or less. But nobody lives more than 1,000 years. Oh, I think the word unknown shows up sometime. So put in unknown. So all right, now that I've got this, and you know what? Sorry, there's a leaf blower going on outside. I didn't tell you to do the constraints in here, but I'm going to add some constraints just so that you can see one way of doing things. There are a lot of other ways to do some techniques that we haven't demonstrated in class. But just really quickly, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to bolt my classification and designation to the top left. So I'm going to highlight both of them at the same time. Click on pin, I'll do top, I'll do left, and I'm going to keep the width and the height of these guys both the same, and add those two constraints. And then for these guys on the right, why don't I drag these over here until I hit my margins on the sides here. Did I hit my margins? Let's see, this is the 20 margin, so if I want to do it on the 20 margin or the 16 margin, I guess that's probably better to do it here. So that'll be fine. We'll see what this says. So now I'm going to grab these two, and let's see what I'm going to do. So I'm going to bolt them to the top. I'm going to bolt them to the left, which essentially means I'm always going to have these guys on the left-hand side, and I'm just going to have these guys left justified with them, but I'm going to stretch out the contents of what I've got here depending on the width of my view controller. So that's why I'll link it to 16 over here. And I'm not going to change my width because essentially I've set my width here to be extending, but I'll keep my height the same. Let's see how this looks. And just to do a quick check to see, hey, is this going to be resizing the way that I want to when I go over here? Yep, these top ones are doing okay, so let me do the rest. Down here, let's see. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to embed these guys into stack view real quickly and then just center that because that might make that easier. So I'll highlight those guys and go to, let's see, embed in a stack view, and I am going to center this horizontally in container. Whoops. And I'll pin this to the element above it. And then these next guys I'll set up the same way that I did up here. And again, there's no reason why you couldn't have done a stack view for these guys as well. I'd probably lay things out a little bit nicer, might make some more sense, but just this is quick and easy, and hopefully this is very similar to what we've done in class, so you can absorb that. So I'll, again, pin these left and top, and I'll keep the heights and the widths the same. And then for all these things on the right-hand side, what I'll do is I'll pin the tops, the lefts. For the right, I'll make all of these, how about the 16, which is where everything was before, and I'll keep the height at the 21. So let's see if this changes. So good, this looks good. Let's see how this would look on the largest style iPhone that I've got. Am I resizing the way that I expect? Yes, that looks good. So now back over here to the smaller iPhone, the iPhone SE. The one thing that I did not add is a image view. So we'll grab an image view, drag this guy over, plop it in, and we'll go edge to edge here. And let's see, I'll link this to the top, to the 16 on two sides here, and to the bottom at 0, add 4 constraints. My image is, I've got no image in there initially. Aspect fit is what I want for my image, so that's great. So again, you didn't need to do constraints, but hopefully that wasn't too painful if now you know how to do them, or a quick way to set them up, which I think makes this look good. But again, no points off if you didn't do any constraints, no problem. I did not ask for that on the test. And now I give a bunch of different names for these things to set up. So name label, and then species image, classification label, designation label. So let's set those up here. So I'm going to click on DetailViewController, option click on main storyboard, and I'm going to drag over these individual elements here. So let's see, this first one is called name label. So control drag over, let go, name label. I always double check to make sure that I drag on it right. It's a UI label. Yep, click on connect. That's good. Then I'm going to grab on this guy here, drag it over, put it right underneath, and call this classification label. Give myself a little bit more space. Get rid of the empty space that I created here. Let's see, this is going to be designation label. Height label. And again, not the static labels, it's the other thing that I'm clicking on here. Height label, because I'm not changing the other things. You only need to create an outlet for the things that you're interacting with in your code. I'm doing my weight label below that. Get rid of my extra space. And let's see. Hair color label. I could do, and another thing that you could do as well too is you could just grab this stuff here and paste it in here, 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 here. So let's see, hair color labels. If you wanted to call this skin color label, this one language label, this one eye color label. And I'm going to get rid of my hair color label here. Then, once you've done this, notice that you've broken the connections here. But what I can do is I can just click here and drag over to skin color label and language label and eye color label. Just lots of different ways to set things up. Oh, and the one thing that I didn't do is my image view. So let's see, what did I call this one here? Species image. So I'll control drag over and call this species image. Probably be better if I call it species image view, because it's an image view, it's not an image. An image is a property of it. So I'll click on connect in there, and it looks like I've got all of the outlets that I've wanted to set up. So that's looking good. And it says, as a segue that's triggered when the user taps on a table view cell, it should be a show segue. It should bring the user to the detail view controller. And we don't have any data that's in here right now. So let's just go ahead and set that up. So, all right. And give myself some space in here. And let's see, do they say what we should call in here? Did they say? I wrote the test. Did I say? So I guess I didn't give you a name for the segue in here too. I'm just going to call this show segue, which is good practice, but we actually don't need to refer to the segue specifically because we're only going to have one segue in our app. But just to show you, so I'm going to click in the cell. You want to make sure that you click on the cell and not the content view. It's really easy to do like the extra click and be in the content view, but you want to be in the cell. And now that we've got the cell, you could even drag from over here if you want. Control drag over, let go. It's going to be a show segue. The segue shows up. I'm going to click on the circle in between this line here. I'm going to go up under the attributes inspector, and I'm going to give this the name, how about show detail is I guess what we've been doing in class. So that's a good name to kind of show the detail. When you click on it, boom, we've set that up, no problem. Now it says update your app so that the segue passes the appropriate species data struct for the species data clicked on and passes it from the view controller to the detail view controller, and save the species data that you pass to the detail view controller in a variable named species data. So what we said in class is we need something to catch what we're passing over here. That's going to be our variable named species data, which is going to be a species data struct. So I've clicked on this guy here. I actually don't need to show the main storyboard, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to create a variable again to catch the species data that I'm going to pass over. So I'm going to call this lowercase species data, and I'm going to say colon, this is capital, species data like this, exclamation point. What we typically do for catching as well is we evaluate and we say, hey, did we get a value? If not, we'll initialize it. Frankly, in this one, we can just go ahead and initialize it right up here because we're never going to create a new value. What we usually check for the initialization for is if we're creating a new value in here. But just to be consistent with some of the techniques that we learned in class, I'll say if species data equals nil, then species data equals capital species, capital data, open and close parentheses here. So we've initialized it to the default values, and we can go ahead and do this because we have declared and initialized them right here when we declare a new, or in our blueprint for the species data struct, in our struct declaration. So good, we've got that set up. And now what we want to do down here is we will say name label dot text equals species data dot name. So all right, now what we want to do is we want to pass over what we've clicked on. So we'll go over to viewcontroller.swift, and remember we pass that stuff over in our prepare for segue. And the prepare for segue should behave pretty much the same way for every app that we write. I'm going to put in more code that we need because when we learned this, we learned the code to set things up in case we do want to either modify the data in there. Even though we're not going to do it right now, I'll reuse the code just so we make sure that you know that extra code that's in there. It's not going to harm our app at all, and it would actually put some stuff in place if for some reason we had the ability to edit these different Star Wars species and then push them back up, which we can't do at this point. So what we're going to do here is our prepare for segue. And then what we do is usually, again, we only have one segue in here. So since we have one segue, technically you don't even need to check to see what the name of the segue is. But we usually do if segue.identifier, remember we named this show detail. So again, that's not needed because we only have one segue. It's always going to be show detail, or it should be as long as you spelled it properly. Then we're going to do here is we're going to say let destination equal, and that's going to be segue.destination. Now this is a UI view controller, but we want it to be more than the UI view controller. We want it to be DetailViewController because that's where we have our property stored that we want to pass stuff into. So we'll say segue.destination as exclamation point, and then capital DetailViewController, again, just like we did with our Pokemon stuff. Now that we got this set up, we want to figure out which one we clicked on. So we will say let selected index path, we could call that anything, but selected index path is good for an index path that was selected. And we'll say table view dot index path for selected row. And normally this is an optional, but I know 100% that if I'm in here and this segue is attached to clicking on a cell, that it's always going to execute when I've clicked on and I have an index path. So that's why I'm forced to unwrapping here. You could do a check for possible nil in there, but the way that I've set this program up, it'll never be a nil. And then I'm going to say destination dot, and remember the value that we just added, which is species data, to catch what we're throwing over here. So we're going to refer to destination.species data, and that's going to equal what do we have here? Species dot species array at index path. No, not at index path, at selected path dot row. So again, what did you click on? Okay, we found it. Go to the row of the index path that we clicked on, grab the species array. What is a species array? If you option click on it, it will tell you it is an array of species data. And this guy here is also a single value of species data, so we're passing this over. And again, if we had not done this as DetailViewController here, species data would not show up as an option for us to do the destination controller because the species data is only in the DetailViewController. So now we've got that set that up. That's great. This will work. Again, we didn't even need the first part, so we don't even need the else part too. But often what we've done in the past is we've deselected. So we typically say something in here like if let selected index path equal table view dot index path for selected row. Then we say table view dot deselect row at index path selected index path, and for our Boolean value in here, we'll just say, select an index path. We'll just say, sure, we'll do the true animation in there. So this should work. We're going to pass the stuff up. We've already, in our table view, or I'm sorry, in our detail view controller, we're catching it in species data. We should never have this as an issue in here, but we put it in just as a little safety check, and we've done this in previous examples. And then for our name label.text in here, we've also got we're updating what we pass over. Oh, what I also did not do is in the main storyboard, I mentioned that I want to clear out all of these values. So let's go ahead and do that. So instead of it saying sentient, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of height. I'm going to get rid of unknown. And that's a bummer. This all of a sudden resized. So let me see if I can do a height on this stack view. If I click on stack view. So let's see, let's do height of, I think 21 was the height that we had in here. Yep, that fixes it. I can backspace over sentient and backspace over this sentient. And I don't think I can do multiple ones at the same time, but I'll see if in the last one if I can. So there's multiple values, I'll just backspace over, press enter. Oh, I could. So that would have saved me a lot of time if I just option clicked on top of them and did it once. So I learned a trick here by showing you the answers for the exam. So let's go ahead and build and run and see how things are looking. And we'll see where we are in our test. So update the app with the segue that we pass the structure for the species that's clicked on when we pass the stuff over. The top of ViewController should show a back indicator, so we want to go ahead and do that. We should clear out any generic label text inside of labels, which we've done. The result should look roughly like what we've got above. So let's see. What we didn't do is we didn't put the back label in here. So if we click on Yoda species here, we see Yoda species. The name passes over, which is great. We want this to say back up here too, though. So how do we do that? If we click on our main storyboard and click on, see, it's showing the back button here. But if we click over here and just for back button, if we type in the word back and press enter, the next time we run, it should say back in there when I build and run. So with that said, I'm just going to double check this to make sure that this works. We're back in, taking a look at the next thing that we need to do. All our strings in here, even height and lifespan. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new class named SwiftyDetail, which should contain all of these properties that we have in here. So then let's see if we do here. Yep, back shows up now, which is great. So I'll go ahead and create SwiftyDetail. And let's see. So I'll do that right under species. So this is file, new, file. It's a new class. It's a Swift class because Apple doesn't have a class called SwiftyDetail. And so we'll call it SwiftyDetail. Upper camel case here. It shows up underneath. I will say class SwiftyDetail, open and close curlies. And then these are all the different things that we have, and all of them are going to be strings. So what I'll do is I'll just grab these guys here and copy them. I realize that you've had to type them, but I'll save you having to watch me type too much here. And then, after I've got a variable typed in, I'll just continue to add var to the front of these guys here. And they're all going to be strings, so I'll just do, I'll initialize, I'll declare them and initialize them at the same time. There's no harm in doing this in the app that we're writing, and it prevents us from having to write an initializer. So, because it's a class, we don't need to write an initializer with a struct. So there we go, this should be fine. Now inside DetailViewController, create an instance of SwiftyDetail named SwiftyDetail. So, all right, let's go ahead and do that. And just the way that we have species data, we're going to say var SwiftyDetail and colon species. And you know what I'll do is just to show you that I can do this, I can say equals SwiftyDetail, and I'll send it to the class factory, and it will create a new SwiftyDetail here. I'm not passing anything in here, so this is an initializer with no parameters in it, but I can do that. How come? Because I've initialized all of these properties when I've declared them. So again, a little bit of space saving, time saving in here too, but we want to get these things done as quickly as possible on the exam. So I've created my SwiftyDetail. And now that I've set this up, I can go ahead and say, okay, SwiftyDetail.name equals SwiftyData.name technically I don't even need to have the name in there, but it's fine to have it all in kind of one class. And I'm going to say species.api. Did I do API URL? Let me see in here. Yeah, there should be a species detail API URL. So species up. I didn't call it species detail. That's the problem. Species detail dot API URL, and that's going to equal species data dot URL. Now the URL it's passing over here is just to reiterate. So, oops, I forgot. These are the species images that I download. So I'm just going to save these right to the desktop. So just to reiterate here, so let's imagine, we're on page 4. It doesn't matter. We could be on our first page here too, if you want to see what that's like. Let's imagine we clicked on our first guy here, so hut. If we click on hut, what we're going to pass over is the name hut, and we're also going to pass over this URL. Now this URL will become the API URL on the next page, because that's what we did. We just swap those over, and now we're eventually going to use that to access all of this information and to populate the data that we've got. So that's why we make that change there. So inside ViewController, create an instance of species detail, which we just did. Modify the segue so that we pass over. We did all that stuff. We created our class down here. Call getDetail in ViewController.swift and update the interface so that all of the data except for the image loads. The example should be what's at the right. So we want to let's see. So we want to set this up so that we add a method getDetail to species detail when called that will update all of the stuff that we've got in there. And it does say, hey, these are the different keys that we've got. So our classification is called classification. Be aware, lifespan is called average underscore lifespan. Eye color is eye underscore colors. So you want to make sure that you copy those right from what we've got. But let's go ahead and create getDetail. And again, what's nice about the way that we've written our code is we can reuse a lot of the code that we've got in here, just make some minor changes to it. So we've already got a get species. I'm going to copy get species with a command C. I'm going to go over to species detail. I'm going to paste in get species, but instead I'm going to call this get species detail. Let's make sure that that's what I asked you to call it. Just get detail. Sorry, we can call it get detail. Get data would have been a fine name too. So we're going to do our API request. Why is this not showing up? Because we did not import Alamofire. We did not import SwiftyJSON. So now that we've got this, we can use the statements that are down here. So we're going to go ahead and our error is going to be the same. Our switch case is going to be the same. We've got our escaping, which is down here, which is going to be the same. The only thing which is going to be different is the guts of what we're getting from our JSON. So what I'm going to do, just so that I can even pay attention and reread, how do I set things up in JSON again? Oh yeah, I'm going to show these values here. What I'm going to do is actually set up a string value. So this is kind of what it's going to look like. So I'll just copy this in here. But instead of grabbing things from next, I'm going to grab them from classification. And what this is going to be is then classification is going to be, so we're updating classification with what is in the JSON on this page, which we've just accessed up here, API URL. Remember, we passed that in, so we're going to call that with this new API URL that we updated because we passed that in from our table view. And we are, so we've got a classification in here. And oh, so we just can continue to do this with everything else. So in addition to classification, we can do, let's see, designation, skin color, hair color, eye color, language, height, and lifespan. And what's weird is you would think normally that, age would be a number, but it's in quotes. And you would think that, lifespan would be a number, but that's also in quotes that you've got down here. So, so all of these are indeed string values. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to change each of these one by one. So then designation, skin color, hair color, eye color, language, height, and lifespan. And designation, I think, is designation. Language, I think, is language. But these other ones are changed here. So let's see. Designation, average height is what height is. And I just copy and paste them because this way, I'll know I haven't made any mistakes, any typing errors here. Skin color is skin underscore colors, plural. iColor is I_colors. Let's see, is language language? Yep. And what else do we have here? Average height and its average lifespan. So there's average height and where is lifespan? It should be in here someplace. Average lifespan, yep. So now that I've got this, I've got all my data, so I don't need this stuff anymore. This is what I had used previously. So what's nice is, again, when we start to do things in a standard way, you can see we can continue to reuse just a ton of our code. And in fact, we didn't even need to change this API URL stuff because, if you just make sure, okay, any URL that I'm going to need to access in my data access call, I'm going to call API URL. You don't even have to change like this upper part of the code either. So hopefully that was pretty easy. We got a lot of reuse in there. Let's go ahead and build and run and see how things look. And we have everything. Everything should be uploading when we click on it. Let's see all this when we get this running here. I don't know why it's so low. There we go. And it should be loading. Yep, we got some more in there. We click on HUT. We see all this jobbity goodness. Oh, we didn't call it. So that's why this isn't showing up. And not only will we have to call it, but we'll have to also update all these things in the user interface too. So let's just go over here to DetailViewController. And so one of the things we can do down here is now that we've updated our API URL, we can say species detail dot get detail, and again we have our this handler is going to execute here, the completion handler, after we have our data. So that's when our escaped clause says, hey, now I can you can go ahead and do this because we've got the data that we need. And what we'll do in here is we'll just say we don't need to do an update table view, but what we'll do is we'll put all of the text to update our user interface into a function called update user interface. Func update user interface. You didn't have to do this. There's no reason why you couldn't just type all of the stuff right in here, but it just makes our code, I think, a little bit easier to read. Update user interface, because we don't have like a lot of extra interface code right underneath just what's happening inside here. This needs to be a self dot, and then in here what we're going to do is we're going to update all of these particular values. So what I'm going to do is, just to make sure that I know that I've got them all, I'm going to copy them all here. I've already updated my name label, so I don't need to change that, but I'll paste these other guys in here. And let's see, I'm just going to go ahead and cut out now the first part of them. So make sure that I update all these guys. And this one here too. And what I'm going to do now is I can delete the stuff on the end. I suppose I could find and replace this too if I wanted to, which would probably be even more efficient. But for classification label, it's actually going to be classification label.text, and that's going to equal species detail.classification. Then down here we'll do designation label.text equals species detail designation. And again, if I want to be super fast here, I can just say, okay, I'm going to copy and paste that little chunk so I don't have to repeat it, and paste this dot height, go back, paste this dot weight. Is weight showing up? So this is troubling. I'm not getting code completion here, so that suggests that I probably made an error. So let me go over to species detail. And you may have seen this error while I'm typing it in. So let's see. Oh, we don't have weight, do we? Did I call something weight? Let's see. Maybe we do have weight and I just missed something in here. What does the main storyboard look like? So we have height and lifespan. We don't have weight. I don't know why I called something weight. So I don't know what weight is connected to. So let me make sure that I don't have any kind of weird errors in here. Sorry about that, folks. And again, you see how I was tipped off. I didn't have some code completion. So when I move my cursor over to weight, what is weight connected to? It's collected to lifespan. It shouldn't be called weight label. It should be called lifespan label. I don't have anything that says lifespan in here. So I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to refactor, rename. You don't want to just type over the name because you're going to break your connection. and I'll call this lifespan label. Press enter, and it made the change down here for lifespan label, which is great. And then I can put in lifespan, good, and let me continue to paste this stuff in down here. And this one isn't called lifespan, it's called hair color. And down here, it's skin color. And down here, it's language. And down here, again, sorry for the leaf blower, it's eye color. And down here, it is, oh, species image. So we're not going to do the image stuff yet, so I'll hold on that. Let's just make sure that this works in here. Update user interface. We've got no arguments in this function, so I just need my open and close parentheses in there to prove that. And now when we run, we should see the detail for any of the creatures. And if you know your Star Wars characters, we can sort of verify that, but here's all the stuff that should show up for Jabba. He's a gastropod, he's 300 something's tall, he's green, brown, and tan. And then if we want to take a look at somebody else, we'll take a look at Mon Calamari, which is an amphibian. I have no idea what that is. Sorry. Don't hate on my Star Wars lack of knowledge. And here we are. So let's take a look at the hut. We got all the stuff is going to get access. Did we pass it over? I don't see anything. So, oh, there we go. It finally got it. So that's great. And for some reason, it's not showing all of the stuff down here. I don't know why. If this is going to another, let's see, height, lifespan, hair color. This should be language. So yeah, we have some things that aren't showing up properly here. I'm curious as to what's going on in our main storyboard. If I set some things up wrong, when I tried to do our constraints. So let's see, how does this stuff look when it's in our, yeah, so this looks like the constraints should be fine when I show them over here. Let's see in our DetailViewController, lifespan is lifespan, hair color is hair color, skin color is skin color, language is language. I want to make sure that I've linked all of these properly, so let me go ahead and check with those ones as well. So if I move my cursor over the top of all of these, it's designation label, height, lifespan, hair color, skin. Oh, so look, I'm showing them in these areas here, so I dragged them into the wrong one, which is bad. You might have seen me do that, which is not good. So I'm gonna get rid of skin color. I'm gonna get rid of, geez, I don't know where they are, but I'm just gonna grab a whole bunch and just kind of get rid of them here and recreate them. So that was me trying to be too fast and show you a special technique. So let me see, I'm gonna drag over my lifespan label. Let's see, my hair color label, I'm gonna make sure that I get rid of that one too. I think that one was screwed up. Where are you, hair color label? There we go. Let's see, skin color, eye color. So, all right, we'll do hair color, goes right over to hair. And again, you're just seeing me kind of, diagnose these errors here. Feel free to fast forward beforehand if you didn't make this error, but it's sometimes useful for students to see me make errors and to solve those errors, so to diagnose what went on. And so now I'm going to move my cursor over and I can see, yep, now they're all in the right place, I think, as I move up here. Let's see, lifespan, yep. So if I go ahead and build and run again, I clicked on stop before, that's why I'm not getting the message, do you want to stop? And how do you look, Hut? Nobody out Huts the Jabba. Come on. Oh, and we have a crash here. So what do we have, a crash? Species label name in here. What don't you like? Unexpectedly found nil when unwrapping an optional value. Let's see. So species data up here should create a new species data. Which value is the one that doesn't have any information in here? So I'm going to do PO species data. What is this? Do we have anything in species data? Let's see. Is it printing stuff out? Unresolved identifier, species data. Why don't you like that? I'm going to say PO species data dot. So PO is print output, and I'll see name. Do I have a name in here? Hut. Yeah, so that's not the problem. So it should be name label.text, which means, oh, there's my name label. It's not linked. So I must have unlinked that by accident. So it didn't tell me exactly what was nil. But when I took a look in here, I saw that there was something that was nil, and I checked to see, was I getting species data.name? Yes, so by doing PO species data.name, it said hut, so it must have been name label.text, and sure enough, when I looked up here, it was not linked. So now when I build and run, and again, I'm leaving all of this in even though it's taking up more time. Hopefully it's a good error handling tutorial for you to see. Here's some stuff, and we're chugging along. It's taking a while to do that load. When we were running this in class, the API shut down for a little bit because there's too much access. I'll click on hut. Do we have all the hut data here? Come on, hut, access the hut data. Hut. It should show. It will show. I have confidence. There we are. Good. So we got all the stuff that we expected for hut. Let's just make sure that we're getting some other stuff. Ewok, those are little tiny guys in here. So what do we have for our Ewoks? You're going to show us your stuff. Ewok's good. And this sort of resizes in here too. I guess one of the characteristics of the so sorry, I'm fritzing out on you here, of the stack view that we have in the middle here. So if you wanted to make the height a fixed size, you could do that and you wouldn't have that little jump back and forth. But this is all looking good. The one thing that we don't have in here are our images. So I'm going to go ahead and put our images in right now. So I save those to our desktop. I'm going to unzip what I downloaded. All of my images of the Star Wars guys are in here. They're labeled 0 through, I think, 36. So there are 37 Star Wars guys. I'm going to go here, Star Wars species images. I'm going to click on Assets Catalog. I'm going to grab all of these guys. I did a Control A, drag them all over, plop them all in here. Here are all of my different images. So if I want to show them, let's take a look at what we have here for the next bit. So add images, add them to the assets catalog, which we've done. Modify your code so that the image from the appropriate species is shown. Hint, you will have to pass over the array index for the table view cell clicked on and use this in DetailViewController.Swift when referring to the image name of the image in your assets catalog. So we could do this in lots of different ways, but one thing that I'll do is I'll just create another value in DetailViewController, and I'll call this var image index. And you know what? I'm just going to declare it as 0 because I'm going to update it when it passes over anyway, and I know I'm always going to pass over a valid value. So I'm going to go back here to ViewController.Swift, and now, remember, where do we pass our stuff over? In prepare for segue. So I'm going to say over here, right after I pass over my species data, you could do it before too, it doesn't matter. I'll say destination dot and image. So image index isn't showing up, so I'm going to do Shift Command K, which does a rebuild. Now let's see, image index is showing up, and I'll say that equals, and it should equal selected index path dot row. So now that I passed this over, I now know which image I clicked on, which is, again, if we take a look at the asset names, so the first image for Java is 0, 1, 2, 3. So super easy in terms of how we can show the image if we go into DetailViewController.Swift. Same way we've showed images in everything else that came out of the assets catalog. If we say, again, what did we call this? Species image view. So species image view, it's an image view, dot image equals, and if we say UI image, open parentheses, we're going to go to the image factory here. We're going to give it a name. Whoops, I'm going to make sure that I type that in right. Image, so go to the image factory. We're going to give it a name, which is going to be a string. So I'll just say named string. And it's called image, but then I'll do string interpolation in here, and I'll say image index. I just want to make sure that they're called image 0, 1, 2, 3, all like this. So let me go back and triple check assets catalog. There we go. So we're going to build and run. Let's see if we've got our Star Wars app. Cross your fingers. And here we go. Let's see Java. Woo! There he is. And let's see, can we scroll through to the end here for the 37 species that we've got? Let's see a little Chewy time here with the Wookiee. All right, Chewy, you're looking good. Ugh. So, all right, all these guys are showing up. Wonderful. So there's your app. It works. Hopefully you're feeling good about your skills. Hopefully you did well. If not, remember, we've got our makeup option as well. I'm going to show you the next app in the next video. Keep at it.